Captain Sarah Mitchell had served 15 years in the Army Rangers, longer than most of the men in her unit had been out of high school. At 42 years old, she'd earned every scar, every commendation, and every ounce of respect that came with being one of the best snipers the military had ever seen. But respect, she'd learned, was something you had to keep earning, especially when you were a woman in a world that didn't always want you there. The sun beat down on Fort Bragg as Sarah walked across the parade ground, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust. She was heading to a briefing, one that would determine the future of her career and possibly save lives. Intelligence had come in about a terrorist cell operating in the mountains of Afghanistan, and her team was being considered for the mission. "Well, well, if it isn't Grandma Mitchell," a voice called out from behind her. Sarah didn't need to turn around to know it was Lieutenant Derek Morrison, a 30-year-old hotshot who joined the Rangers 2 years ago and seemed to think his youth made him invincible. She kept walking. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Morrison said, jogging to catch up. Two other young soldiers flanked him, both grinning like they were in on some private joke. "Heard you're up for the mountain op. Don't you think it's time to let the younger guys handle the heavy lifting?" Sarah stopped and turned to face him. Morrison was tall, muscular, with the kind of cocky smile that probably worked on civilians but meant nothing out here. "The day you can outshoot me, Morrison, is the day I'll consider stepping aside." "That's just it, Captain," Morrison said, his smile fading. "This isn't about shooting paper targets. This is real combat. When's the last time you were in the field? Your reflexes aren't what they used to be." One of Morrison's friends snickered. Sarah recognized him as Private First Class Jenkins, a kid from Texas who'd washed out of sniper school twice. "My grandma's faster than you, and she uses a walker," Jenkins said. Sarah felt the familiar burn of anger in her chest, but she'd learned long ago not to let it show. "My last confirmed kill was 8 months ago. What's yours, Jenkins?" "Oh, that's right. 0. Jenkins's face turned red, but before he could respond, Morrison stepped forward. "Look, Captain, nobody's questioning your past service, but facts are facts. You're slowing down. The commander needs to know that before he puts lives at risk." "The commander will make his own decisions," Sarah said coldly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a briefing to attend. Unlike some people, I don't waste time running my mouth when there's work to be done." She turned and walked away, her back straight, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. But Morrison's words echoed in her head. She wasn't slowing down. She couldn't be. The Rangers were her life, the only family she had left since her husband died in a training accident 7 years ago. The briefing room was already half full when Sarah arrived. She took a seat near the front, nodding to a few familiar faces. Colonel James Patterson stood at the head of the room, studying a map on the wall. He was a good officer, fair and experienced, but Sarah knew he was under pressure from higher up to show results. "All right, settle down," Patterson said as the last few soldiers filed in. "We've got a situation that requires immediate action. Intelligence has located a high-value target in the Hindu Kush Mountains. This man, Khalid Nazari, is responsible for coordinating attacks that have killed over 200 coalition forces in the past year." Patterson clicked a remote and a satellite image appeared on the screen. It showed a compound built into the side of a mountain, accessible only by a narrow path. "Nazari's hiding in a fortress. One way in, one way out. He's got about 30 fighters with him, all well-armed and trained." "Sir, what's the play?" asked Captain Robert Chen, the team leader for Alpha Squad. "We're sending in a small team," Patterson said. 4 operators. You'll insert by helicopter 5 miles out, hike in under cover of darkness and set up overwatch positions. The sniper will take out Nazari when he shows himself. Once he's down, you extract immediately." Sarah leaned forward. This was exactly the kind of mission she'd trained her whole life for. Long-range precision work, minimal collateral damage, in and out clean. Captain Mitchell will lead the mission, Patterson continued. The room went silent. Sarah felt a surge of pride, but it was immediately followed by a whisper from somewhere behind her. Is he serious? It was Morrison's voice. She's going to get someone killed. Patterson's eyes narrowed. You have something to say, Lieutenant. Morrison stood up, his jaw set. With all due respect, sir, I do. Captain Mitchell is a fine soldier, but this mission requires peak physical conditioning. We're talking about a 5-mile hike through mountain terrain at high altitude, followed by potentially hours of holding position in extreme conditions. I think we need someone younger for this. Sit down, Lieutenant, Patterson said, his voice hard. Sir, I'm just thinking about the mission success. I said sit down. Morrison dropped into his seat, but Sarah could feel the eyes on her, could sense the doubt spreading through the room like poison. She'd faced this before, but it never got easier. After the briefing, Sarah was gathering her notes when Patterson called her over. Captain, a word. She followed him to his office, dreading what was coming. Patterson closed the door and sat down heavily in his chair. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Always, sir. Can you do this mission? And before you answer, I want you to really think about it. Morrison's an idiot, but he's not completely wrong about the physical demands. You're not 25 anymore. None of us are. Sarah met his eyes. Sir, I ran the mountain course last month. My time was better than 60% of the Rangers on this base, including Morrison. My last qualification score was Expert Plus. I've done missions twice as difficult as this one. I can do this. Patterson studied her for a long moment. I believe you, but I need my team to believe it too. If Morrison's running his mouth, others are thinking the same thing even if they're not saying it. I can't have my operators doubting their team leader in the field. So what are you saying? I'm saying prove them wrong. Tomorrow morning, 0500 hours. You and Morrison one-on-one competition, long-range shooting and the obstacle course. You beat him and nobody questions your spot on this mission again. You lose. He trailed off. I won't lose, Sarah said quietly. That evening, Sarah sat alone in her small apartment off base, cleaning her rifle. It was a ritual she'd performed thousands of times, one that calmed her mind and focused her thoughts. The M110 sniper rifle was an extension of herself, every curve and mechanism as familiar as her own heartbeat. Her phone buzzed, a text from Captain Chen. Heard about tomorrow. You got this, Sarah. Show that punk what a real ranger looks like. She smiled. Chen was a good man, one of the few who'd never treated her differently because of her gender, but she also knew that even he probably had doubts. 42 was old for active combat duty. Most soldiers her age were behind desks or training recruits. But Sarah wasn't most soldiers. She finished cleaning her rifle and went to bed early. Tomorrow would decide everything. The sky was still dark when Sarah arrived at the range the next morning. Morrison was already there, surrounded by a group of young soldiers who'd apparently come to watch the show. News traveled fast on a military base. Colonel Patterson stood between them holding a clipboard. All right, here's how this works. First event, long-range shooting. 5 targets at 1,000 yards. Most hits wins. Second event, the obstacle course. Best time wins. Best 2 out of 3 overall. Any questions? No, sir, Sarah and Morrison said in unison. Then let's get started. They moved to the shooting range. The morning air was crisp, and Sarah could see her breath as she settled into position. She'd shot in conditions far worse than this. Afghanistan in winter, Iraq in sandstorms, this was nothing. Morrison went first. He was good, she had to admit. 4 out of 5 hits with 1 shot just barely missing the target. The young soldiers cheered. Then it was Sarah's turn. She slowed her breathing, felt the wind on her face, calculated the distance and drop. The rifle became part of her, an extension of her will. She squeezed the trigger. The first shot rang out, hit. She adjusted slightly for the wind shift. Second shot hit. By the time she finished, all 5 targets had holes dead center. The cheering stopped. Morrison's face went pale. "Well," Patterson said, marking his clipboard, "that's one for Mitchell. Let's move to the obstacle course." The obstacle course was brutal. Walls to climb, ropes to swing from, a mud pit to crawl through, and barriers to vault over. It was designed to break soldiers, to separate the strong from the weak. Morrison went first, attacking the course with aggressive speed. He was fast. Sarah had to give him that. His time came in at 4 minutes and 32 seconds, well above average. Then Sarah stepped up to the start line. Every eye was on her. Every doubt, every whisper, every snide comment about her age came down to this moment. "Go," Patterson shouted. Sarah exploded forward. Her body screamed in protest as she hit the first wall, pulling herself up and over. She wasn't as fast as Morrison on the flat sections, but she was smarter, more efficient in her movements. No wasted energy. Every step calculated. The rope swing, the mud pit, the barriers. Her lungs burned. Her muscles ached. But she pushed through, drawing on 15 years of experience, of pain, of refusing to quit. She crossed the finish line and checked Patterson's stopwatch. 4 minutes and 28 seconds. She'd beaten Morrison. The young soldiers stood in stunned silence. Morrison stared at the ground, his fists clenched. "Looks like we have our mission leader," Patterson said. "Mitchell, you ship out in 48 hours. Get your team ready." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She'd won, but she knew this wasn't over. Men like Morrison didn't forgive being shown up, especially not by a woman they'd underestimated. But that was a problem for another day. Right now, she had a mission to plan and a terrorist to stop. As she walked away from the range, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Let them doubt her. She'd spent her whole career proving people wrong. What she didn't know was that this mission would push her further than she'd ever been pushed before, and that the real test of her strength was still to come. 48 hours later, Sarah stood in the hangar with her team doing final equipment checks. Colonel Patterson had assigned her 3 operators: Captain Chen, who she trusted completely; Sergeant Marcus Webb, a demolitions expert with 10 years of experience; and to her dismay, Lieutenant Derek Morrison. "Sir, with all respect, why Morrison?" Sarah had asked Patterson privately. "Because he's one of the best tactical operators we have, and you know it," Patterson had replied. "And because if this mission succeeds with him on your team, nobody will ever question your leadership again. Sometimes, Sarah, we have to work with people we don't like. That's what makes us professionals." Now, watching Morrison check his gear with barely concealed resentment, Sarah wondered if Patterson had made a mistake. A team needed trust, and she wasn't sure Morrison was capable of giving it. "All right, listen up," Sarah said, gathering the team around a map table. "We insert here 5 miles from the target. The terrain is rough, steep in places, but nothing we can't handle. We move in darkness, maintain radio silence except for emergencies. Chen, you're on point. Webb, you're in the middle with the demo kit. Morrison, you take rear security. I'll be second in line." Morrison looked up from his rifle. "Shouldn't the team leader be at the rear, where you can see everyone?" "I need my best tactical operator watching our backs," Sarah said evenly. "That's you. Can you handle it?" Morrison's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The flight to the insertion point took 3 hours. They flew low, under radar, through mountain passes that made Sarah's stomach drop. She'd made dozens of insertions like this, but it never got easier. The helicopter was a sitting duck if anyone spotted them. Finally, the pilot's voice crackled through her headset. 2 minutes to drop. Sarah signaled to her team. They stood, checked each other's gear one last time, and prepared to fast rope down into the darkness. The helicopter hovered 15 feet above the ground, and one by one they descended. Sarah went third, her gloved hands controlling her descent down the thick rope. Her boots hit earth, and she immediately took a knee, scanning the darkness through her night vision goggles. Nothing moved. The helicopter pulled away, its sound fading into the distance, and then there was only silence and the whisper of wind through the mountains. "Team sound off," Sarah whispered into her radio. "Chen good. Webb good." A long pause, then Morrison good. They moved out, Chen leading the way with his rifle up, sweeping for threats. The terrain was exactly as brutal as Sarah had expected. Loose rocks, steep inclines, thin air that made every breath a struggle. But they were rangers. This was what they trained for. 3 hours into the hike, Sarah's legs were burning. The pack on her back felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and the altitude was making her head pound. But she kept moving, one foot in front of the other, refusing to show weakness. Behind her, she heard Morrison's breathing, heavy and labored. At least she wasn't the only one struggling. They were crossing a particularly steep section when Webb's voice came over the radio. "Hold up. Movement ahead about 50 yards." Everyone froze. Sarah moved up next to Chen, peering through her night vision. There, barely visible in the green glow, were 2 figures walking a patrol route. "Nazari's guards," Sarah whispered. "They're not supposed to be this far from the compound." "What do we do?" Morrison asked. Sarah calculated quickly. They could try to slip past, but if they were spotted, the whole mission would be compromised. They could take out the guards silently, but bodies had a way of being found. "We wait," Sarah decided. "Find cover and stay low. They'll pass and we'll move once they're clear." "That could take hours," Morrison protested. "We're already behind schedule." "We wait," Sarah repeated firmly. "I'm not risking exposure this close to the target." They hunkered down behind a rocky outcrop, watching as the 2 guards made their slow patrol. Sarah's instincts had been right. The guards were thorough, checking every shadow, every possible hiding spot. If they'd tried to move, they would have been spotted. After 40 minutes, the guards finally moved on. The team resumed their movement, but the lost time nagged at Sarah. Dawn would come in a few hours, and they needed to be in position before first light. They reached their overwatch position with only 30 minutes to spare. It was a rocky ridge overlooking the compound, about 800 yards from the main building. Perfect sniping distance. Sarah set up her rifle, using a small rock ledge as a rest. Through her scope, she could see the compound coming into focus as the sky began to lighten. It was bigger than the satellite photos had suggested, with multiple buildings and several vehicles parked outside. "Command, this is Mitchell. We're in position," she whispered into her radio. "Copy, Mitchell. You're cleared to engage when you have a positive ID on the target. Good hunting." Now came the hard part, waiting. The sun rose slowly, painting the mountains in shades of gold and red. Sarah barely noticed. Her attention was focused entirely on the compound, watching for any sign of Khalid Nazari. Hours passed. The team took turns on watch, staying alert, staying ready. Sarah's body ached from holding position, but she didn't move. This was what snipers did. They waited, sometimes for days, for that one perfect shot. It was almost noon when Morrison's voice broke the silence. "Movement. Main building, 2nd floor window." Sarah swung her scope over. There, barely visible through the window, was a figure. Tall, bearded, matching Nazari's description. "I need confirmation," Sarah whispered. The figure moved closer to the window and Sarah's breath caught. It was him. Khalid Nazari, the man responsible for so many deaths, so much suffering. "I have positive ID," Sarah said, taking the shot. She settled her breathing, felt the wind, calculated the distance and the drop. Her finger moved to the trigger. And then Morrison said, "Wait." Sarah froze. "Say again." "Don't take the shot, look at the window. There's a reflection. I can't tell if it's reinforced glass." Sarah looked again. Morrison was right. There was something off about the window, a slight shimmer that could indicate bulletproof glass. If that glass is reinforced, the shot won't penetrate, Morrison continued. You'll blow our position for nothing and he'll disappear. We need to wait for him to come outside. Sarah's mind raced. Morrison was right, which annoyed her more than she wanted to admit. The professional thing to do was wait for a better shot. Stand down, she said. We wait. But waiting meant staying in position longer, which meant more chance of being discovered. Sarah felt the tension building in her chest. 20 minutes later, Nazari appeared outside, flanked by 2 bodyguards. He was walking toward one of the vehicles. I've got him, Sarah said. Clear shot. She settled her crosshairs on Nazari's center mass, breathed out slowly, began to squeeze the trigger. The ground beneath her exploded. Sarah felt herself flying through the air, felt the sharp pain of rocks tearing at her skin, felt the world spinning. She hit the ground hard, tumbling down the rocky slope, unable to stop her momentum. Somewhere above her she heard gunfire, shouting, Morrison's voice screaming into the radio. We're compromised. Multiple hostiles, they knew we were here. Sarah tried to get up, but her body wouldn't respond. Everything hurt. She could taste blood in her mouth. Through blurred vision, she saw figures running toward her position. Mitchell's down, Chen's voice panicked. She went over the edge. More gunfire, explosions. The sound of helicopters in the distance, but they were too far away, they'd never make it in time. Sarah tried to move, tried to reach for her weapon, but her arms wouldn't work. She could feel herself slipping, consciousness fading. The last thing she heard before the darkness took her was Morrison's voice, cold and flat. Leave her. She's gone. We need to extract now. And then there was nothing. When Sarah opened her eyes, she didn't know how much time had passed. Hours, days. The pain hit her first, a wave so intense she nearly blacked out again. Every part of her body screamed in agony. She was at the bottom of a ravine, surrounded by rocks and scrub brush. Above her the sky was dark. Night had fallen. Slowly, carefully, Sarah took inventory. Her left arm was broken, she was certain of that. Several ribs, too. Her leg was twisted at an angle that made her stomach turn, but she was alive. She tried her radio, but it was smashed, useless. Her rifle was gone, lost in the fall. All she had was her sidearm and a knife. The smart thing to do would be to stay put, hope for rescue. But Sarah knew the truth. Morrison had left her for dead. No rescue was coming. If she wanted to live, she'd have to save herself. Using her good arm, Sarah dragged herself to a nearby rock and pulled herself into a sitting position. The pain made her vision go white, but she breathed through it, waiting for it to pass. She had no food, limited water, and multiple broken bones. She was at least 50 miles from the nearest coalition base, in hostile territory, with no way to call for help. But Sarah Mitchell hadn't survived 15 years as a ranger by giving up when things got hard. She tore strips from her uniform and fashioned a crude splint for her arm. Using a straight branch, she did the same for her leg. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Then, using the rock for support, she pulled herself to her feet. The pain was indescribable. Sarah bit down on her lip to keep from crying out, tasting fresh blood, but she was standing. She looked up at the mountain, at the impossible climb ahead of her. With a broken arm and leg, it should have been impossible, should have been. But Sarah had spent her whole life doing impossible things. She took one step, then another. Each movement was agony, but she kept going. She had a mission to complete, a team to confront, and a score to settle with the man who'd left her to die. For 3 days, Sarah crawled, limped, and dragged herself through the mountains. She drank from muddy streams and ate nothing, her body running on pure determination. Twice she had to hide from enemy patrols, lying motionless in the brush while armed men passed within feet of her position. On the 4th day, delirious from pain and exhaustion, she stumbled onto a dirt road. A local shepherd found her collapsed in the dust, and for reasons Sarah would never fully understand, chose to help rather than turn her in. He brought her to his home, a small stone house hidden in the hills, where his wife cleaned her wounds and set her bones properly. Sarah stayed there for 2 weeks, healing enough to travel. The shepherd spoke little English, and Sarah spoke no Pashto, but they communicated through gestures and shared humanity. When she was finally strong enough to move, he drove her in his ancient truck to within 5 miles of the coalition base, refusing the money she tried to give him. "American soldier," he said in broken English, touching his heart. "Good." Sarah never learned his name, but she would never forget his kindness. She walked the last 5 miles on her still healing leg, approaching the base just as the sun was setting. The guards at the gate didn't recognize her at first. She was 50 pounds lighter, her face gaunt and scarred, her uniform in tatters. "I'm Captain Sarah Mitchell," she said to the stunned gate guard. "Serial number 557294668. I'm coming home." The base erupted in chaos. Within minutes, she was surrounded by medics, officers, and soldiers who'd been told she was dead. They rushed her to the hospital, where doctors marveled that she was alive at all. Colonel Patterson came to see her that night. He stood in the doorway of her hospital room, his face a mixture of relief and something else. Guilt, maybe. "Sarah," he said quietly, "thank God we thought. Morrison said you were dead. Said he saw you fall, saw the enemy close in. We held a memorial service last week." "I'm sure Morrison was very sad," Sarah said, her voice flat. Patterson stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Sarah, what happened up there? Morrison's report said you were ambushed, that you fell during the firefight, but some of his details don't add up." "Where is Morrison now?" "Back at Bragg. The whole team was pulled back after the mission failed. Nazari got away." Patterson sat down in the chair next to her bed. "Talk to me, Sarah. What really happened?" Sarah told him everything. The setup, the explosion, her fall, and Morrison's order to leave her behind. Patterson's face grew darker with each word. "He left you to die," Patterson said, his voice tight with anger. "Yes, sir." "Can you prove it? His report says he tried to reach you but was pinned down by enemy fire." Chen and Webb back up his story. "Chen and Webb were following orders," Sarah said. "They're good soldiers. They did what their acting commander told them to do in a crisis situation. But Morrison, he made a choice." Patterson stood, packing the small room. "This is serious, Sarah. If Morrison deliberately abandoned you, that's a court-martial offense. But without proof, it's your word against his and the rest of the team." "Then I'll find proof," Sarah said. She was medically evacuated to Germany, then back to the States. The doctors said her recovery was nothing short of miraculous, though she'd never regain full mobility in her left arm. They wanted to medically retire her, but Sarah refused. She had unfinished business. 6 weeks later, still moving with a slight limp, Sarah walked into Fort Bragg. The base felt different now, or maybe she was the one who'd changed. Soldiers stared as she passed, whispers following in her wake. The dead woman walking. She found Morrison in the training area, running drills with a group of new recruits. He looked up as she approached, and for just a moment, she saw pure fear flash across his face before he masked it with surprise. "Captain Mitchell," he said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "thank God we all thought. When you fell, there was nothing we could do. The enemy fire was too heavy." "Really?" Sarah said calmly. "Because I remember you saying, 'Leave her, she's gone,' before a single shot was fired at your position." Morrison's face went pale. "You're mistaken. The trauma, the fall, it must have confused you." "My memory is crystal clear, Lieutenant. You left me to die." The training ground had gone silent. Every recruit, every instructor was watching now. Morrison stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, Sarah, I know you've been through hell, but you need to think about what you're saying. There's no proof of anything. The team followed protocol. We extracted under fire. That's what the report says, and that's what happened." "Then you won't mind if I request a formal investigation." I think you need more time to recover, Morrison said, his voice hardening. You're obviously not thinking clearly. Maybe it's time to accept that age caught up with you. You made mistakes up there and now you're trying to blame someone else. Sarah smiled, cold and dangerous. We'll see about that. She went directly to Patterson's office and requested a formal review of the mission. Patterson, to his credit, approved it immediately. Within days, investigators were interviewing every member of the team, examining Morrison's report, and analyzing the radio communications from the mission. But Morrison had been careful. His report was thorough, detailed, and supported by Chen and Webb's statements. There were no radio recordings because they'd been operating under communication silence. It was her word against 3 other soldiers. Sarah was in her office, reviewing maps of the mission area for the 100th time, when Captain Chen knocked on her door. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always." Chen came in and closed the door. He looked uncomfortable, wouldn't meet her eyes. "Sarah, I need to say something, and I need you to understand why I couldn't say it before." Sarah leaned back in her chair, waiting. "Morrison's report isn't entirely accurate," Chen said quietly. "When you fell, I wanted to go after you. I was already moving to your position, but Morrison ordered me to stop. He said you were gone, that we'd all die if we didn't extract immediately. And you followed his orders. He was the ranking officer with you down. I had to follow orders, Sarah, you know that." Chen finally looked at her. "But there's something else. About 30 seconds before that explosion, I saw Morrison check his GPS and move to the left just a few feet, like he knew it was coming." Sarah sat up straighter. "You think he knew there were mines?" "I think someone told that enemy patrol exactly where we'd be," Chen said. "I think we were set up, and I think Morrison knew about it." "That's a serious accusation." "I know, that's why I couldn't say anything without proof, but I've been doing some digging." Chen pulled out a folder and laid it on her desk. "Morrison's had some money troubles, gambling debts, big ones, about $50,000 worth. Then 2 weeks before our mission, those debts disappeared, paid in full." Sarah opened the folder, scanning the bank records Chen had somehow obtained. "Where did you get this?" "Don't ask, but look at the deposit. It came from a shell company with ties to Afghan poppy traders, the same traders who work with Nazari." The pieces clicked into place in Sarah's mind. Morrison had sold them out, taken payment to make sure the mission failed and Nazari survived. He'd positioned the team where the enemy was waiting and made sure the one person who might figure it out didn't survive to tell the tale. "Why would he do this?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "Money, pride, maybe both." Chen shook his head. "He's been talking about you since you got back. Says you're trying to ruin his career because he's better than you, younger, smarter. He's painted himself as the victim and a lot of people are buying it." "But you're not." "I was there, Sarah. I saw his face when he ordered us to leave you. There was no panic, no regret. He wanted you dead." Chen stood up. "I'll testify to what I saw if it comes to that, but you need more than my word. You need solid proof." After Chen left, Sarah sat in her office thinking. Morrison had been smart, but not smart enough. Money left trails, and she knew someone who was very good at following them. She made a phone call to an old friend in military intelligence, a woman who owed Sarah her life from a mission in Iraq years ago. Within 48 hours, Sarah had everything she needed: bank records, communications between Morrison and an intermediary, even a recorded conversation that had been picked up by satellite surveillance. Morrison had sold them out for $50,000 and a promise of more to come if he eliminated the one person who might suspect the truth. Sarah had been the target all along. Armed with evidence, Sarah went to Colonel Patterson. This time, she wasn't alone. Chen was with her, along with Sergeant Webb, who'd also started having doubts about Morrison's story. Patterson reviewed the evidence in silence, his face growing harder with each page. Finally, he looked up. "This is enough for a court-martial," he said. "But Morrison has connections, family in high places. This is going to get ugly." "I don't care about ugly," Sarah said. "I care about justice." "There's something else you should know," Patterson said. "Morrison's been telling people that you're making this up because you can't accept that your career is over. He's got a lot of the younger soldiers on his side. They think you're a bitter old woman trying to take down a rising star." "Let them think what they want," Sarah said. "The truth will speak for itself." The court-martial took 3 weeks. Morrison maintained his innocence, painting Sarah as a vengeful superior officer who couldn't accept that her time had passed. His lawyer was good, picking apart every piece of evidence, suggesting alternative explanations. But the evidence was overwhelming. The money trail, the satellite intercepts, Chen's testimony about Morrison's suspicious behavior. Piece by piece, Sarah's case built until there was no doubt left. On the final day, Morrison took the stand. He was confident, smiling, certain that his charm and connections would save him. Sarah's lawyer stood up for cross-examination. "Lieutenant Morrison, you stated that you ordered the extraction because of heavy enemy fire. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir." "And you believed Captain Mitchell was dead?" "Yes, sir, I saw her fall. There was no way she could have survived." "I see." The lawyer pulled out a document. According to the radio logs, which were recently recovered from a backup satellite recording, the first enemy shots weren't fired until 45 seconds after you ordered the team to retreat. How do you explain that? Morrison's smile faltered. I must have been mistaken about the timing. The situation was chaotic. Chaotic enough that you forgot the order of events, or convenient enough that you thought no one would ever check. The lawyer stepped closer. You left Captain Mitchell to die because she was the only one smart enough to figure out you'd betrayed your country. Isn't that the truth? No. You took money from terrorists. You compromised a mission. You attempted to murder a fellow soldier. And when she survived, you tried to destroy her reputation to save yourself. Morrison's composure cracked. She was supposed to be dead. The plan was perfect, and then she just wouldn't die. The courtroom went silent. Morrison seemed to realize what he'd said, his face draining of color. "No further questions," the lawyer said. The verdict came swift and unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Morrison was sentenced to 30 years in military prison, dishonorably discharged, stripped of all rank and benefits. As they led him out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Morrison looked at Sarah one last time. "I should have made sure," he said bitterly. "Should have put a bullet in you myself." "You underestimated me," Sarah said calmly. "Just like everyone else, that's why you lost." In the weeks that followed, Sarah's story spread through the military. The legendary sniper who'd survived betrayal, fought her way back from certain death, and brought a traitor to justice. The young soldiers who'd mocked her age and questioned her abilities now looked at her with awe and respect. Colonel Patterson offered her a promotion and a position training new Rangers. "Your combat days are over, but your experience is invaluable. You could shape the next generation." Sarah considered it. She was 43 now, with a body that would never be quite the same. She'd proven everything she'd set out to prove. Maybe it was time to step back. But then she thought about Morrison's words, about being too old, too slow. She thought about all the young soldiers who needed to see that experience and determination could triumph over youth and arrogance. "I'll take the training position," Sarah said, "but I want to keep my field certification active. I'm not done yet, Colonel, not by a long shot." Patterson smiled. "I wouldn't expect anything less." 6 months later, Sarah stood on the same range where she'd competed against Morrison. But this time, she was the instructor, watching a new group of recruits attempt to qualify. Among them was a young woman, barely 20, who was struggling with her long-range shooting. The other recruits were giving her a hard time, making jokes about women not being strong enough for sniper work. Sarah walked over and placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "Ignore them," she said quietly. "I've been hearing that nonsense for 15 years. Want to know the secret?" The young recruit looked up, hope in her eyes. "Yes, ma'am." "Prove them wrong every single day. Never give them a reason to doubt you. And when they doubt you anyway, because they will, you prove them wrong again." Sarah smiled. "Some people will never believe in you. Don't waste your time trying to convince them. Just keep being excellent and eventually your work will speak for itself." The young woman nodded, determination replacing the doubt in her face. She settled back into position, adjusted her aim, and took her shot. It was a perfect hit. As Sarah watched the recruit's face light up with pride, she thought about her journey. The falls, the betrayal, the pain, the triumph. It had all led to this moment, standing here, passing on her knowledge to the next generation. They'd thrown her into the abyss, but she'd climbed back out. They'd tried to break her, but she'd only grown stronger. They'd underestimated her, and that had been their biggest mistake. Sarah Mitchell was a survivor, a warrior, and a legend, and she was far from finished. The sun set over Fort Bragg, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, the same colors that had greeted her in those mountains so long ago. But this time, Sarah wasn't fighting for her life. She was living it, fully and without apology.